Welcome. This is AllMinucOne. My name is Bill. Please, if you like my content, share and subscribe. Hit that like button. I just put out a video about communism and communist subversion, and I came across something else in between before I started this one that I'd like you all to see. So let's play that real quick here.
There's this thing where if you're a black cop, you're not black. I take this uniform off and I'm suspicious. I look like someone that these people would then call the police on. I had been, when I was young, at a party and I got jumped by a group of white people. Okay, me putting this uniform on does not erase that history that I've had. I got to see folks that really do want change, like the rest of us, that have been impacted by racism. And then I got to see those people get faded out by people that have no idea what racism is all about, never experienced racism, that don't even know that the tactics that they are using are the same tactics that were used against my people. And they don't even know they don't even know the history. They don't know what they're saying. Coming from someone who graduated from PSU with a history degree, it's actually frightening. I'm cool with, people feeling like they want to help a movement, but then when you go to a gentrified community, and one of the first pictures I saw one of the business that was looted was a black-owned business. I'm like, they're not even from here. They don't even know what they're even doing. It's divisive. It's hurting the community. And I mean, I saw that press conference. Clearly, the community was not happy with that, and they even asked for the violence to stop. And they still are coming out and having these violent interactions with other citizens, the police. And at some point, you just go, what is the end goal? Bloody Sunday, Selma. Those folks marched because they wanted the right to vote. And they were beaten in the street to have rights that they were told they couldn't have because they were not even human. And then having folks scream and yell that they're being peaceful protests, but you're not peaceful because it is violent. And I actually had a cousin who went to one of the marches and he left. And he said, this has turned into something else. This is weird. So having an African-American male marching and then leaving, like I said, it's been very eye-opening. It says something when you're at a Black Lives Matter protest, you have more minorities on the police side than you have in a violent crowd.
All right. So I will link the full interview in the description. I just thought that you should hear this from a police officer who is from that community. It is an important thing that he talks about because he's saying that these people don't know what they're doing and it's outsiders coming in. And this was my whole point before about the communist and the communist revolution here in America, because that is the reality of what is going on. And as he said about helping the movement, of course there are people who wish to help the movement. They wish for there to be certain reforms and for things to get better. The thing is we cannot do that through violence. And you have to understand the system in which you are in. So capitalism is often referred to as fascism. This is not so. Now, it's referred to this way because the left controls the narrative. They control all the framing, and the people who aren't part of that decide to allow it to happen. The site here, the Global Fascist Revolution, well, this isn't the site, it's the World Future Fund. But the Global Fascist Revolution, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, speaks about the shady practices that our governments have been going through. Excuse me. It is our hope that the key problems of our time can be solved by non-violent political change by means of democracy. Indeed, for 20 years, we have had programs to achieve this goal, such as our Citizens Education Guide. We are opposed to all forms of radical and religious discrimination, racial and religious discrimination, and have a major program in this field, our global education project. However, we need to face the grim fact that today's democratic political system face a very uncertain future due to total failure to create a sustainable system that can last in the long term. Today's world order is presiding over the largest destruction of life since the Permian extinction and 250 million years ago. No amount of corporate or political greenwashing can cover up this reality. Meanwhile, the global economy has not resolved the problems that led to the near total economic collapse of 2008. And by the way, we're on our way to another economic collapse. Just between doing similar practices as well as this whole COVID issue and the U.S. spending just tons and tons of money. I've been talking about this for years, and people blow it off. They think that we can just start all over. The best thing that we can do, the easiest thing that we can do is not pay our debts, but that's going to cause problems. And the biggest thing that we can do is get rid of the Federal Reserve Bank. So when it's talking about this problem, this unsustainable system, it's because there's no reality to it. We have fake, funny money. They just print it. They just decide what the interest rates are going to be, and they decide when they're going to expand the money supply, which devalues your money, and then the taxation system on top of that. And all these things are centralized economies. This is not capitalism, people. This is a centralized economy, and this is part of the system of fascism that America is softly involved with. All right. It says, indeed, old debts have simply been papered over with even larger new debts, financed by the largest wave of money printing in world history. Mussolini invented the term totalitarianism, but it is actually a system of government that is thousands of years old. Indeed, a lot of what Plato represented could be seen as fascism, as is documented in our report. Below, we link to documentary materials about fascism from ancient times to the current era. Today, parliamentary democracy in the West is in the greatest crisis in its short history in terms of flow of historical time. It faces the grim consequences of ignoring nature's laws and creating a system that is certain to face either drastic change or total destruction in a series of environmental and economic disasters. The system is in a state of paralysis, and the failure of the democracy in ancient Rome, plutocratic forces tend to dominate the democratic system, sometimes creating a sham democracy that is really ruled by money. As the failure of democracy in ancient Athens, democracy in America is dominated by lunatic delusions of world empire. Leadership is all too frequently dominated by professional politicians who believe in nothing, like Angela Merkel and Hillary Clinton. Now, let's pause here for a minute. I've read to you before. You go back to my video with John Adams talking to John Taylor about the Athenian democracies. I believe that's a video with Bastiat. If you go back, you see everything that I'm saying. It's not like I just pulled this from this website. I understand these things. And we cannot keep up the system. The people who are very rich will not be hurt as much or so much by an economic collapse. In fact, if anything, they'll capitalize on it. The people that have power, they'll capitalize on it. But this is not a free market system. Let's see. The end result is a system that is actually moving towards totalitarian systems of control while actually claiming to be trying to save democracy. Obama has actually accelerated the totalitarian legal revolution of George Bush. That's true. It's all true. Albert Speer observed that fascism will come back as anti-fascism. It is happening today, and these trends are going to accelerate far more rapidly as the environmental and economic debts and contradictions enforce their will on the rotting and bankrupt system of governments. The ancient poet Homer stated in the Iliad, "The rule of many kings is the road to disaster." There must be one king with absolute authority. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow, history rules remain the same. We would hope the modern democratic systems could reform themselves. However, this is very unlikely. Thus, this report has enormous importance for the global future. Now, I'm not a fan of monarchy. I'm a very libertarian type. But I do understand the calls towards monarchy. Democracy nearly always leads to tyranny, which is why in America, we didn't start with a democracy. We started with a republic. And the people have allowed the republic to slip away. If you want it back, then you need to stand up and say something. You need to fight for it. Excuse me. So, here are some reports: Ancient Roots of Modern Fascism, Nazi Germany, documentary source, Mussolini, The Doctrines of Fascism, so forth and so on. Fascism and around the world, here in Japan. Books on Amazon, Fascism in Asia, Fascism in the Islamic world, Fascism in India, Fascism in China, and Latin America. We can continue and continue and continue. Post-war fascism. Anyways, I'm not going to show you all these. What we are going to do is read a little bit of the Doctrines of Fascism by Mussolini. So, let's start. First paragraph. Like all sound political conceptions, fascism is action and it is thought. Action in which doctrine is immanent and doctrine arises from a given system of historical forces in which it is inserted and working on them from within. It has therefore a form of correlated to contingencies of time and space, but also to the ideal content which makes it an expression of truth in the higher region of history of thought. There is no way of exercising a spiritual influence in the world as a human will dominating the will of others unless one has a concept both of the transient and the specific reality on which that action is to be exercised, and of the permanent and universal reality in which the transient dwells and has its beginning. Now, from that statement, he is going to expand. And one of the things that he talks about in the next portion here is fascism as a spiritual view of life. Now, this isn't spiritual as in religious, at least as far as a deity. No. It is spiritual as in raising the spirit through the force of the government. Thus, many of the practical expressions of fascism can be, or fascism such as party organization, system of education, and discipline can only be understood when considered in relation to its general attitude towards life. Spiritual attitude. Fascism sees the world not only those superficial material aspects in which man appears as an individual, standing by himself, self-centered, subject to natural laws, which instinctively urges him towards a life of selfish, momentary pleasure. It sees not only the individual, but the nation and the country, individuals and generations bound together by a moral law with common traditions and a mission, which suppressing the instinct for life, closed in a brief circle of pleasure, builds up a higher life found on duty, a life free from the limitations of time and space, in which the individual, by self-sacrifice, the reincarnation of self-interest by death itself, can achieve that purely spiritual existence in which his value as a man consists. He goes on to talk about how man alone, a singular individual, it means nothing in time or throughout history. It's all the people around them. So what he's really saying is collectivism. Now, in the words on their face value, I could kind of say, oh yeah, no, man should be spiritual, and he's got a duty to other people, and we should help each other out, and that's the thing, and that's where the left twists this stuff, and they try and make it out to be some form of Christianity. The difference is, what I believe is based in biblical scriptures, and that you do not have a right to tell me what to do. The government may, whether I agree or disagree with it, but Christ never commanded there to be a political church. That was a function of the Roman mindset. That was not how the church was organized in the beginning. In fact, they were cellular, they were separate, and they were all autonomous. And eventually, the Roman bishop, being in Rome, the capital, took charge and took over and gained much influence. And a lot of that had to do as well with the Roman emperors essentially giving them more and more power and authority. That was the marriage of the church and the state. Now, what this is saying is similar. It is saying that it is a spiritual attitude about the world, and that you need to look towards the future. And this future is going to be constructed by a strong hand. So he goes on, you can read this for yourself. I'm going to jump down to the importance of tradition. In the fascist conception of history, man is a man only by virtue of spiritual process to which he contributes as a member of the family, the social group, the nation, and the function of history to which all nations bring their contribution. Hence, the greater value of tradition in records and language and custom and rules of social life. Outside history, man is a non-entity. Man is a non-entity outside of history. What he's saying is there is no individualism. What he's saying is that you don't have any actual autonomy. The state does. And your only value is if you worship the state. Does this sound familiar? Maybe a little bit like communism? Rejection of individualism and the importance of the state. Fascism is therefore opposed to all individualistic abstractions based on 18th century materialism. And it is opposed to all Jacobinistic utopians and invitations. So he's saying the Jacobins, who would have been the socialists, we reject them. But he's also saying the 18th century materialism, he's talking about liberalism, not modern liberalism, classical liberalism, as in what people would call often nowadays libertarianism. It does not believe in the possibility of happiness on earth as conceived by the economist literature of the 18th century, and it therefore rejects the theological notion that at some future time the human family will secure a final settlement of all of its difficulties. This notion runs counter to experience, which teaches us that life is in continual flux and in process of evolution. In politics, fascism aims at realism. In practice, it desires to deal only with those problems which are the spontaneous product of historic conditions and which find or suggest their own solutions. Anti-individualistic, collectivist, the fascist conception of life stresses the importance of the state and accepts the individual only insofar as his interests coincide with those of the state, which stands for the conscience and the universal will of man as a historical entity. Now, I don't know if you've read anything about communism, but this is pretty much what communism teaches, that we are on this progress of life, progressivism in any form, which fascism is a progressive ideology. It is a left-wing socialist ideology. It just rejects certain parts of Marxism. It kind of changed it just a little bit. And it doesn't care who it tramples on as long as it gets to the utopia. So every single human being can die along the way. But once we get to this utopia, once we get to this place of greatness, then we can stop just destroying and murdering and burning everything down and being totalitarian, because everyone will just then, they'll just fall in line like a bunch of robots. Is opposed to classical liberalism, which arose as a reaction to the absolutism and exhausted its historical function when the state became an expression of the conscience and will of the people. Liberalism denied the state in the name of the individual. It did, but he's talking about 18th century liberalism. He's talking about Enlightenment philosophies. He's talking about people like John Locke, and he's talking about people like John Stuart Mill, people like Bastiat, these men who had these ideas and these conceptions of freeing other men. What Mussolini's saying is, no, you're not free. No, the state, that's where all the power is. It is literally no different than communism. Fascism reasserts the right of the state as expressing the real essence of the individual. So the collective gets to express your individuality. This is like the anti-fascist, right? Antifa, or anyone on the left that dictates the way you need to think, that you can't have true dissension, you can't have free liberal ideas. They use the word liberal, but improperly. They use it. The word means free. It comes from Latin. And if liberty is to be the attribute of living men and not of abstract dummies invented by individualistic liberalism, then fascism stands for liberty, and for the only liberty worth having, the liberty of the state and of the individual within the state. The fascist conception of the state is all-embracing. Outside of it, no human or spiritual value can exist, much less have value. Thus, understood, fascism is totalitarian, and the fascist state, a synthesis of a unit inclusive of all value, interprets, develops, and potentiates the whole life of a people. Goes on, no individuals or groups, cultural associations, economic unions, social classes outside the state. Fascism is therefore opposed to socialism, right? Here's the again, like the false dichotomy, to which unity within the state, which amalgamates classes into a single economic and ethical reality, is unknown, and which sees in history nothing but the class struggle. Fascism is likewise opposed to the trade unionism as a class weapon. This is because they don't like the power struggle between the unions and the government, so they just let the government run everything. But when brought within the orbit of the state, fascism recognizes the real needs which give rise to socialism and trade unionism. Oh, so under the state, it's okay to have them as long as the state controls them. Giving them due weight in the guild or cooperative system in which divergent interests are coordinated and harmonized in the unity of the state. Now, this is kind of important because he talks about the guild or cooperative system. Perhaps you've heard of a co-op before, where people own multiple parts of a store or some service. It's a very communistic idea, correct? The guild systems were basically the old unions during the medieval period, and they protected people. That kind of guild system kept people from having trade skills because it was very hard to get into the guilds, and only certain people were allowed in. And that was a protective means so that not everyone could become a carpenter. It was a means of control. Classical liberalism denies those things. It says, no, if you're good enough, you're intelligent enough, you should be able to get in, and you should be able to train this. And if you have a chosen or a profession that you've chosen that you think you'll be good at or that you like, you can try your hand at it. Now, what it also says, because it has a free market, is that if people don't like your goods and you don't, they're no good, they're not of any value to anybody, they don't want them, then, you're out of luck, man. You need to go figure something else out. But that's not the same as communism. When communists talk, if you listen to them, they sound just like this. They talk and they talk about how, everyone should just be able to do whatever they want. And if, there's communism, everyone just had money. You could go be an artist, regardless of how terrible your art is. You could go, there would be more creativity. Well, that's not right because most people aren't that creative in the first place. All kinds of stuff. So anyways, I can read this whole document. It's rather large. You can get a paperback copy of this pretty cheaply, as well as other writings, but this website is quite useful if you want to understand these things. So the fascist state as a spiritual force. So again, the religion is within the state. The difference between communism and fascism, as far as that little tweaking goes, is that in a fascist state, they believe in some sort of higher spirituality. In a Marxist communist state, they believe that you have to get rid of religion. And that was because Marx hated God. I mean, he's written some pretty sick poetry about God. Excuse me, folks. I just ate before I made this, so might have a few pauses here. The fascist state, as a higher and more powerful expression of personality, is a force, but a spiritual one. It sums up all the manifestations of the moral and intellectual life of man. Its function cannot therefore be limited to those of enforcing order and keeping the peace, as the liberal doctrine had it. It is no mere mechanical device for defining the sphere within which the individual may duly exercise his supposed rights. The fascist state is an inwardly accepted standard and rule of conduct, a discipline of the whole person. It permeates the will no less than the intellect. It stands for a principle which becomes the central motive of man as a member of civilized society, sinking deeper down into his personality. It dwells in the heart of the man of action and of the thinker, of the artist and of the man of science, the soul of the soul. So the state is worshipped, right? The state is to be thought of all the time. Again, I can go back to Zamantian's book, We, and these are the ideas. This is similar to 1984, of course. This is the idea that the state knows better than you, and if only you give your mind over to the state and these people and their technocracies and let them engineer you. This goes back to Plato's Republic, right, where he has the guardian class and eventually the philosopher kings. Fascism, in short, is not only a lawgiver and a founder of institutions, but an educator and a promoter of spiritual life. It aims at refashioning not only the forms of life, but their content, man, his character, and his faith. To achieve this purpose, it enforces discipline and uses authority, entering into the soul and ruling with undisputed sway. Therefore, it has chosen as its emblem the lictern rods, a symbol of unity, strength, and justice. Now, this is important. The fascii. We have this on our own. We have it on our money, and I believe in our seal in the United States, because the idea of the fascii is Roman, and the idea is it's a bundle of sticks wrapped around. There's usually an axe in the center of it, and that fascii, where we get the word fascism, represents unity of many forces being brought together. So in the United States, that unity is the 13 colonies, the original states. And those 13 colonies, we call them states. A state is its own country. But these are things we've gotten away from because we've allowed the central government to dictate and mandate to our minds. Again, this is in part how and why we have a form of fascism in the United States. We have the unions within the state, or the guild type system. We have the corporate structure. Now, I read to you from the Vampire Economy, and that's exactly the kind of stuff that he was talking about. We have the special political class that dictates and rules everything. The big thing that we don't have is that spiritual inspiration. Now, you could call that patriotism and nationalism, but most people that are patriots for being freedom-loving and the Constitution. So we could compare some things to the United States, but it isn't an oppressive force like all other fascist nations. The monetary system, though, that is where the problem lies with us. So I like to use Ron Paul's quote that it is a form of soft fascism. But none of this started, mind you, by anyone, well, other than Teddy Roosevelt. None of this started in America by essentially the right, the traditional right. It all started with the progressives. Really, particularly Woodrow Wilson and FDR. You get up to Calvin Coolidge, and he was laissez-faire. And Wilson, he was a political science professor, and he liked progressive ideologies. He wanted a League of Nations. It's one of the reasons why he forced us to get into World War I, and we can cover that sometime. But the history of that is quite strange because there was no reason for us to be involved in the war, nor for the Germans to be blockaded the way that they were. Part of the reason why Nazi Germany came about was because of that issue of World War I and then sanctions later on. And that allowed the dictator to rise. Because when you demoralize a people, they want a leader. And the answer was this. And we're going to get to that too. The answer was this. The answer was fascism for them. Now, Hitler had a particular scapegoat, and that was the Jews. What communist scapegoat is there right now? I wonder what the scapegoat is right now. What is Antifa saying? What is Black Lives Matter saying? What are the intersexual feminists saying? What are all the SJWs saying? What are these people saying? What are the postmodernists saying? Whiteness, white people, Europeans, we're the scapegoat. So here, political and social doctrine, evolution from socialism. So I'm not going to read all of this. Reformism, revolutionism, centrism, the very echo of that terminology is dead. While in the great river of fascism, one can trace currents which had their source in Sorel, Puget, Lager, I'm not going to read all these names, of the movement socialist, and in the cohort of Italian syndicalists who from 1904 to 1914 brought a new note into the Italian socialist environment, previously emasculated and chloroformed by fornicating with Gelati's party. A note sounded in Olivetti's, Pagan Liber. He's getting into a little bit of Latin and Italian here, so you guys can read this for yourself. It's right here on screen. Anyways, he's saying that this came from socialism, but they had to refine it because their socialism wasn't powerful enough. It wasn't strong enough. When the war ended in 1919, that's World War I, socialism as a doctrine was already dead. It continued to exist only as a grudge, especially in Italy, where its only chance lay incited to reprisal against the men who had willed the war and who were to be made to pay for it. So, again, I would go back, if I were you, and read this because you probably never got the true story of fascism. Now here, it rejects pacifism. So, a fascist nation rejects pacifism. First of all, as regards the future development of mankind, and quite apart from all present political considerations, fascism does not, generally speaking, believe in the possibility or utility of perpetual peace. So the communists sort of do once they get their utopia. Once they beat you and kill you and take everything that you own, eventually they'll have peace. I mean, my God, these people are insane. Absolutely insane. It therefore discards pacifism as a cloak for cowardly, supine reluctance and contradistinctions to self-sacrifice. Sorry, guys, I have a really big screen, and obviously Mussolini is very verbose, and he's using words very energetically, so it's kind of hard for me to see them a bit. On top of that, I'm a little dyslexic, so it does not help. War alone keys up all human energies to their maximum tension and sets the seal of nobility on those people who have the courage to face it. All other tests are substitutes which never place a man face to face with himself before the alternative of life or death. Therefore, all doctrines which postulate peace at all cost are incompatible with fascism. So, basically, if you negotiate with a fascist, you can't negotiate. It's kind of like Antifa, again. The anti-fascists who are fascists themselves. It's because they don't know what fascism is. And they don't even understand that the communism in which they wish to implement is fascist. Equally foreign to the spirit of fascism, even if accepted as useful to meeting special political situations, are all internationalistic or league superstructures which, as history shows, crumble to the ground whenever the heart of nations is deeply stirred by sentimental, idealistic, or practical considerations. Fascism carries anti-pacifist attitudes into the life of the individual. So let's address that real quick. So if you want to be non-globalist, you're a fascist, supposedly. But the United States itself is an international organization. It is a league organization. This did not keep Mussolini from joining the Nazis either in Germany, and joining with the Russians, and joining with Japan. The only reason why the fascists weren't successful is because Hitler decided he wanted the land in Russia, and that was probably because he saw the Slavs as being inferior. And one of the reasons why he probably saw the Slavs as being inferior is, for me, the same reasons that Mussolini is talking right here about the history of fascism, and that is the idea that essentially, if you were a people who were able to be conquered, and the Slavs were slaves most of history, it's where we get our word slave from. The word Slav literally means word, because they had common languages. The Slavs were slaves, and Hitler wanted that land. I mean, it's pretty much probably it. And he thought, yeah, we're the most powerful. Might makes right. So we're going to take it. So right here I have the 25 points of the National Socialist Party of Germany, Deutschland, that is the Nazis. And I just want to take you through this. We demand a union of all Germans and a great Germany on the basis and principles of self-determination of all people. So Hitler was trying to unify the German nation. So that would be Switzerland, that would be Germany itself, Australia, and I guess that's it. Those are the main Germanic. Or not? Did I say Australia? Austria. Those are the main Germanic-speaking nations, and he wanted to unify those. We demand the German people have rights equal to those of other nations. So this goes back to World War I. We demand land and territory for the maintenance of our people and the settlement of our surplus population. Only those who are fellow countrymen can become citizens. This is where they get racial. Only those who have German blood, regardless of creed, can be our countrymen. Hence, no Jew can be our countryman. Now, as I'm reading this unified peoples, this right of equals of other nations, this territory and land for their population to grow, and then only certain people can't be involved as the countrymen. Does this remind you of anything? Isn't this what the CHOP was asking for? Aren't these the things that the communists are asking for? Those who are not citizens must live in Germany as foreigners. the right to choose the government and determine the laws of the state shall belong only to citizens. We therefore demand that no public office of whatever nature, whether in the central government, the province, or the municipalities, shall be held by anyone who is not a citizen. Well, I mean, that's pretty common, but that's kind of the idea of being a citizen, right? We wage war against the corrupt parliamentary administration whereby men are appointed to post by favor of the party without regard to character or fitness. We demand that the state shall above all undertake to ensure that every citizen shall have the possibility of living decently and earning a livelihood. Sounds like communism. If it should not be possible to feed the whole population, then aliens, non-citizens, must be expelled from the Reich. Now, this is where people end up conflating things with the U.S. and the racist stuff and immigration. And look, there are legitimate arguments to restricting immigration or to controlling the flow of immigration for infrastructural purposes. This is not the same thing. Any further immigration of non-Germans must be prevented. And this is where they go back to saying Hitler's, or Trump is Hitler and all that stupid stuff. It's not even close. All citizens must possess equal rights and duties. The first duty of every citizen must be to work mentally or physically. No individual shall do any work that offends against the interest of the community to the benefit of all. So that's that fascist thing. That's that collective thing. And he says, therefore we demand that all unearned income and all income that does not arise from work be abolished. Since every war imposes on the people fearful sacrifices and blood and treasures, all personal profit arising from the war must be regarded as treason to the people. We therefore demand that total confiscation of all war profits. We demand the nationalization of all trusts. We demand profit sharing and large industries. Starting to get a little socialist here, a little communist. We demand a generous increase in the old age pensions. You know, I'm for privatized pensions, but not government pensions. They don't work out well. It's just money they collect and use whatever, and it just accelerates the monetary decline. We demand the creation and maintenance of a sound middle class, the immediate communalization of large stores, which will be rented cheaply to small tradespeople, and the strongest consideration must be given to ensure that small traders shall deliver the supplies needed by the state, provinces, and municipalities. Now, the reason why he was bringing all this up is because Germany was in shambles after World War I, and people didn't have work, didn't have jobs, and that's why he could scapegoat the Jews in Germany, because they did have wealth. Not all of them, but a lot of them had good jobs and wealth, and so they're doing better than the German people. And he's saying, well, you're not from here, you're some other people, and you're the ones causing the problems. We demand an agrarian reform in accordance with our national requirements, an enactment of a law to expropriate the owners without compensation of any land needed for the common purpose, the abolishment of ground rent, and the prohibition of all speculation in land. The abolishment of ground rents and the prohibition of all speculation in land. So I meant to address this earlier. I think I did. I had to do a second take because it didn't record. But the video I did earlier, I talked about the tragedy of the commons. And so when you have private ownership of things, private ownership of land, the land tends to get taken care of. Not always. Some people are neglectful. But when you have public ownership of land, often people will use all the resources immediately. And in economics, this is called tragedy of the commons. And the idea of having public lands like this is usually, again, a socialist, communist type idea. We demand that ruthless war be waged against those who work to the injury of the common welfare. Traitors, usuries, profiteers, etc. are to be punished with death regardless of creed or race. Now, that's pretty totalitarian, right? We demand that Roman law which serves as materialistic ordering of the world, be replaced by German common law. In order to make it possible for every capable and industrious German to obtain higher education and thus the opportunity to reach the positions of leadership, the state must assume the responsibility of organizing thoroughly the entire cultural system of the people. The curricula of all educational establishments shall be adopted to practical life. The conception of the state ideal, science of citizenship, must be taught in school from the very beginning. We demand that the especially talented children of poor parents, whatever their station or occupation, be educated at the expense of the state. Does this not sound like the demands of socialists, of lefties? This is not a right-wing talking point at all. People on the right like things like charter schools and private schools, and they don't want state-run schools. And we know the horror that they create. The state has a duty to help raise the standard of national health by providing maternity welfare centers, by prohibiting juvenile labor, by increasing physical fitness through the indoctrination or introduction of compulsory games and gymnastics, and by the greatest possible encouragement of associations concerning the physical education of the young. Now, if you don't know anything about the systems in the Soviet Union and Russia, that's exactly what they did. It's exactly what they did. And then those that were anyone who was talented, they basically raised up. If you were in the gymnastics, you were probably actually, so you wouldn't be a professional athlete, you were probably actually in the military, and you were part of some special forces unit, and your whole job was essentially just to work out and be the best. Social engineering, guys. We demand the abolition of the regular army and the creation of a national folk army. We demand that there are a legal campaign against those who propagate deliberate political lies and dissension and disseminate them through the press in order to make possible the creation of a German press, we demand. Okay, before I even get into that. Trump says fake news. The news is fake. A lot of it's propaganda. But who is trying to destroy free speech in the country? I'm publishing to YouTube and other platforms, and anytime any of these messages that I put out there could be taken down. These are not right-wing organizations. They are left-leaning. They like the manipulated social structure. They like their power and their control, and they want to tell you how to live and who you're supposed to be. All editors and their assistants on newspaper published in the German language shall be German citizens. Non-German newspapers shall only be published with the express permission of the state. They must not be published in the German language. All financial interest in or in any way affecting German newspapers shall be forbidden to non-Germans by law. So, as you can see, this is a very controlling state. We demand freedom for all religious faiths in the state insofar as they do not endanger its existence or offend the moral ethical sense of the Germanic race. The party, as such, represents the point of view of a positive Christianity without binding itself to any one particular confession. It fights against the Jews' materialistic spirit within and without, and it is conceived that a lasting recovery of our folk can only come about from within one principle: common good before individual good. Collectivism. Right? I'll tell you guys, I'll say, go out, go do good things, go help people out on your own. Don't make me do it at the point of a gun, though. Do you understand the difference? As far as the Christianity thing, he had to do that. And the reason why was because Germany was split between German Catholics, Lutherans, and Calvinists. So they used to fight and kill each other many years ago, and which is completely absurd because they didn't know their scriptures. Calvinism's basically Gnosticism based off of Augustinianism. It has nothing to do with what the Bible says. Lutheranism is the same thing. They're both very big into Augustine. And the Catholic Church is a political organization that I personally believe, hey, here comes one. is the false religion that's mentioned in the book of Revelations. But hey, that's just me. Might do a video of that on that sometime. I'm sure I'll get all kinds of traction. In order to carry out this program, we demand the creation of a strong central authority in the state. The unconditional authority by the political central parliament of the whole state and all of its organizations. The formation of the professional committees and the committees representing several estates of the realm to ensure that the laws promulgated by the central authority shall be carried out by the federal states. The leaders of the party undertake to promote the execution of the foregone points at all cost, if necessary, at the sacrifice of our own lives. Now, again, we can go through all these points. Some of them are actually quite reasonable, but you can see how it gets more and more authoritarian. Fascism, guys, is not classical liberalism. It's not American conservatism. It's not traditionalism. It's totalitarianism, and it's a collective. It's a collective just like the communists do. When they were fighting, the fascists and the communists against each other, it was just about who was going to be in control. In the end, the systems always end up being the same. So, with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this, and go watch my other videos. This is AllMinucOne. My name is Bill. Please like, share, and subscribe. And I wish you all well. It is Friday, so have a great weekend.